If you want to be free, that is a choice. Growing up, I don't really remember my father when he was around. They divorced when I was around 4 years old. Our home life was really toxic. So he was abusive, verbally, physically, in a lot of ways. And years later, I always questioned everything, and I also didn't understand why I had a lot of rage just growing up. I enjoyed fighting, enjoyed anything that was probably not good. I excelled at that, and I just felt alone and just was angry at the world. And I got into a pretty bad fight with my mother, and she had slapped me for some of the things that I said, and I said, don't you hit me again, there's gonna be some problems. And she reared back to hit me again, and I ended up grabbing my mother and throwing her across the room. And that was probably one of the worst days of my life. And I told my mother at that moment, I said, I'm gonna go live with my dad. And she didn't have any other words. She said, if that's what you want. And I went to go live with my father, and then I understood what abuse really was all about. My father, I love him very much, but he was abusive. And there was one day, I guess got fired from my job, and I came home and I told him, and he just whooped my tail. And he was on top of me, and he was choking me. And for the first time, I feared for my life. And as if that wasn't enough, later I was on the street, and it was me. I had 2 bags of clothes, a .22 pistol, and a 1982 Nissan Sentra. And I remember sleeping in that car, just feeling like, what is happening? How did I get here? How does one get to sleeping in your car? And I had called my mother, and my mother, of course, is the Christian woman that she is. She says, son, you should go to church. And I'm furious. And I'm telling her, if God cared about me, I would never be in this position in the first place. Here I am, I was trying to sell drugs, and found myself alone, afraid, and there's no way that this just God would obviously allow me to sell dope freely without fear. That was the rationale that I made. I remember getting off the phone. I was so upset that her only advice to her son, alone, homeless, in a car, was to go to church. But I said, okay, I'm gonna prove that God doesn't exist. And I said, I'm gonna go on a Tuesday afternoon. Tuesday afternoon specifically because nothing happens at church Tuesday afternoon. And I found myself at East Sandwich Community of Faith in East Sandwich, Massachusetts. Once again, there's no black folks in that area. And so I just was half annoyed at that as well. But I show up. It's noon, and I'm fully ready to take a picture almost and prove that God doesn't exist, because if he would existed, he'd have showed up. And I walk in the doors of the church, and it was like Sunday afternoon. The choir was practicing, ushers were practicing ushering, and I do think somebody was up there practicing preaching. The church was full. And then an angel in my life came, and it was this older woman, and I'm just mean and rough around the edges, and I'm cussing, and she asked me, she says, son, are you okay? Do you need anything? Because I do clearly stick out. And I said, no, I don't need anything. I just need to use your phone. And I had nobody to call. So she directs me into the back office, and I pick up the phone, and I literally dial no one. And my insides were screaming, please talk to this woman. Tell her what's going on. My spirit was saying that, but the flesh wouldn't let it happen. I just could not bring myself. And she asked me 3 times. She said, I just think you need to talk. And the last time she asked, I just cuss her out, up one side and around the other. And she took it in stride, and then she hands me a Bible. And she says, I don't know what you're going through, but I do know all the answers are in this Bible. And it was only the Lord that made me snatch that Bible out of her hands, get in my car, and drive away. And for the next 4 days, I read the entire New Testament. And afterwards, I knew that, okay, God, I believe that you're out there. So I said a prayer that I'm sure most people say. Say, God, if you get me out of this, I'll give my whole life to you. You get me out of this, I will give my life to you. And so I went to my buddy that I was selling dope with, and I said, hey, I know it's going to sound weird, but God's telling me I need to leave, and I need to ask you for the money. And he says, I feel the same way. I had a weird sensation that you would come, and I needed to give you money to get home. And he hands me $500 and tells me, Tyrone, never come back. And it was there that God reminded me. He said, do you remember the promise that you gave me? You said, if I get you out of that, you'll serve me for the rest of your life. And today is day one. And that Tuesday night, I went into my bathroom and I prayed to receive Christ. And the pastor that led me to Christ put me on a path, and I ended up talking to everybody I'd ever hurt, I'd ever cussed out, any girl that I'd ever slept with. And I asked them for forgiveness. I had first learned how to forgive myself. And I had to forgive my father. And the last person on the list was my mother, because we had the most estranged relationship. She saw me at my very worst. At the hardest place in my life, but she never stopped loving me. I needed to be reconciled with my mother. And we talked for hours, and I just went through a laundry list of every sin that I had committed. And I was free. And my mother was free. Because she had so much pain from being a single mom and some of the things that she had to go through. But it was not just freeing for me, it was freeing for her as well. And the Lord took me, and a lot of times we think our passions and all that. The enemy took control of that. So what came out of me in rage and fighting and anger was just passion. And when I accepted Christ, he took all of that rage and turned it to a passion for him. Figuring out, okay, this is what I could be. But that's not what you have to be. You don't have to. God has a plan, and it's perfect. And in my life, and I'd encourage anyone, never settle for what other people tell you what your life can and should end up. That belongs to God. It's like, Lord, you have really took me from nothing. You gave me an identity. You are made in the image of God. You are perfect. Your personality, everything about you, God intended. Christ came to make us free.